Hello everyone, my name is Amy, and for the Digital Research Project, I will be discussing the Chicano movement that took place in the 1960s and early 1970s. During this time, it's important to mention the women's suffrage movement and the Chicano civil rights movement, and how these struggles influenced the Chicana movement. Before getting started, the main aspect I'd like for all of you to understand and take in is that social and political change can happen, as we saw during this period. These three important movements all demonstrate that when individuals work strongly together, fighting for their rights, it is achievable to earn social and political success. Now, beginning with this project, the women's suffrage movement, let's discuss and give a brief history of what the women's suffrage movement was and how this relates to the Chicano movement. According to the article, Women's Suffrage Movement, written by Patricia F. Dalton, she states that the movement occurred in the 19th and 20th centuries with a span of 72 years, with the goal of having voting rights for women. Dalton also discusses that several women who played a huge role in this movement, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was devoted to allowing women to have the same rights as men. She co-funded National Women's Suffrage Association and created the famous Declaration of Sentiments. An additional woman who played an important role was Quaker Lucretia Mott, who participated in the American Anti-Slavery Society and believed in the equality of all people despite race or gender. Lastly, Susan B. Anthony. She was a women's rights activist who was a leader, traveled while giving speeches and campaigns about the movement. These three women and so much more all have helped in confronting women's suffrage through their leadership. And in this picture, we can see hundreds of women holding a sign, "Women of the World." These women and the movement inspired future generations, as well as it gave women who were part of the Chicano movement and other additional movements to fight for their rights as well. Finally, in the 1920s, the 19th Amendment granted the rights for women to vote. Diving now into the Chicano movement and the Chicano movement, these two movements are two different movements, but share the same social activism. Let's begin with the Chicano movement's importance and brief history. In the book Quixote Soldiers, a local history of the Chicano movement, 1966 to 1981, David Matiano explains that the main reason why the Chicano movement began is that it had the same incitements as the Black Civil Rights Movement: segregation, poverty, and racism. So surprisingly, how commonly spoken about the Civil Rights Movement, the Chicano movement was facing the same things and was fighting for social justice in the United States. Additionally, in the book Youth, Identity, Power, the Chicano Movement by Carlos Munoz, he talks about the Chicano movement how it began in March 1968 in Los Angeles, where over 10,000 students walked out of four different high schools, also known as walkouts and blowouts. This walkout was done to bring awareness towards racist teachers, school policy, deficiency of freedom, and how there was a lack of education classes speaking upon Mexican American history and culture. This picture shows many young men, families, and also women participating in the walkout protests. Munoz further discusses that women did indeed play a huge role in the Chicano movement, which was mainly led by Chicano men. But they still helped by organizing community events, protests, and marches. While many women participated in the Chicano movement, it inspired them and hoped to start the Chicano movement to focus on the rights of gender equality and reproductive rights. Finally, I will be discussing the Chicano movement after giving a brief history of the women's suffrage movement and the Chicano movement. So what exactly is the Chicano movement? In the book Chicano Feminist Thought by Alma Garcia explores how Chicano feminists were able to raise their voices in opposition to gender tensions/conflicts that they endured during the Chicano movement. They felt it was their time to overcome sexist oppression and search for a room of their own within the Chicano movement. Among several women, Dolores Ureta was one of the first women in the United States who became vice president of a union mentioned in the book New Narratives of Activism and Feminism in the Movement Era by Blackwell. Blackwell also discusses that Dolores Ureta founded the United Farm Workers with the help of Cesar Chavez and had important roles in the rights of farm workers. An additional important figure of the Chicano movement was Gloria Anzaldúa, who wrote her book Borderland La Frontera, the New Mestiza, spreading awareness of identity and the acceptance of diversity. With all of this said, all the different women activists who made a change in the Chicano movement all came from different backgrounds and life experiences. Without them and many other women, there wouldn't be the freedom and rights that Mexican American women have now. The Chicano movement was influenced by the women's suffrage movement and the Chicano civil rights movement, and because of the Chicano movement, it has inspired many activists today to fight for their rights and never give up their dreams. Thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation.